My fiancé cheated with my boss. They didn't know I owned their secrets. I used to believe that discipline protected you. If you worked hard, stayed focused, and trusted the right people, your life would stay stable. That belief shaped everything I did. My name is Audrey Cole, and I built my career on control and precision. I worked as an operations strategist in a fast-growing firm where every decision mattered. I wasn't just good at my job, I was trusted with things most people never saw: systems, numbers, processes. I made them work. Outside work, my life looked just as structured. I was engaged to Marcus Reed, a senior finance lead in the same company. He was calm, confident, and knew exactly how to make people feel secure. We had a wedding planned in 8 weeks. Everything was moving forward in a way that felt certain. My boss, Victor Kane, trusted me deeply. He often said I was the most reliable person on his team. He gave me access to high-level operations that required careful judgment. I respected him for that. Looking back, everything seemed too smooth. There were small signs I ignored: late meetings that ran longer than expected, conversations that stopped when I entered a room, quick glances exchanged between people who should have had no reason to be secretive. At the time, I dismissed them. I told myself it was nothing. I didn't know those small details were warnings, and I didn't know I was already standing inside a situation designed to break me. The night everything changed, I stayed late to finish a report. I preferred working when the office was empty. It gave me space to think clearly and focus without interruption. As I finalized the data, an email notification appeared in a shared internal folder. It wasn't addressed to me, which immediately caught my attention. The subject line read, "Final phase, after transfer." Something about it felt deliberate. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity pushed me forward. The message was short: "Once she signs, we proceed. No delays." My chest tightened, though I didn't fully understand why. I opened the attachment. It was a message thread between Marcus and Victor. At first, I assumed it was related to a project, but as I read further, my name appeared, clear, repeated. They were discussing the contract I was about to sign, the transfer of control over a system I had built. Then the tone shifted. The messages became personal. Too personal. It wasn't just strategy. It was something else entirely. That was the moment everything changed. Not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because I understood it too clearly. I kept reading, even though every part of me wanted to stop. The more I saw, the more precise the situation became. Marcus and Victor weren't just coordinating work decisions. They were planning something deliberate, something structured, and something that involved me directly. They discussed the project I had spent months building. They talked about how critical it had become and how much control I currently held. Then they discussed how that would change. The contract I was about to sign would transfer authority. Once that happened, I would no longer be necessary. They used neutral language, words like transition and adjustment. But I understood the meaning behind them: removal. Then came the part that confirmed everything. They were involved with each other. Not professionally, personally. The realization was sharp, but it wasn't the most important detail. What mattered more was what followed. They were preparing to shift responsibility for financial inconsistencies onto me. They were building a narrative, one where I would take the fall. It was organized, planned, timed. This wasn't an accident. It was a strategy, and I was the target. I closed the file slowly and leaned back in my chair. The office felt quieter than before, but my thoughts were clearer than they had ever been. I had 2 options. I could confront them immediately, demand answers, and walk away from everything. Or I could stay silent, understand the full situation, and respond on my own terms. I chose silence, not because I was afraid, but because I needed control. The next morning, I woke up before Marcus. I watched him for a moment, searching for any sign that something had changed. He looked the same, calm, unbothered. When he woke, he smiled and greeted me like nothing had happened. I responded the same way. At work, Victor called me into his office. He spoke about the contract, about the future of the project, and about how much he trusted me. I listened carefully. Every word mattered now. They believed I didn't know. That assumption gave me an advantage they didn't see. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. That afternoon, I reviewed the contract again. This time, I read it with purpose, not as someone completing a task, but as someone preparing a controlled response. Every detail mattered. Every condition could be used. Then, I found it. A section that allowed for additional legal wording, small enough to avoid attention. I inserted a clause carefully. It stated that if I was removed from the project under disputed or irregular conditions, an automatic external audit would be triggered. Independent, immediate, impossible to stop. I ensured the wording blended naturally into the document. It looked routine. It wasn't. The next day, I signed the contract. Victor appeared satisfied. Marcus congratulated me later that evening. I thanked him and smiled. They believed everything was moving according to their plan. But in reality, that moment changed everything. They were still setting their trap. They just didn't realize I had already stepped outside of it. And when they made their final move, I would be ready. Over the next few days, I moved with careful control, making sure nothing about my behavior raised suspicion. I attended meetings, answered questions, and delivered updates exactly as expected. To anyone watching, I was still the same person, focused, reliable, and unaware. Behind that appearance, everything had changed. Months earlier, I had created a secure archive system as part of a risk management initiative. It was designed to capture internal communication logs, system changes, and financial activities across key operations. At the time, it was meant to protect the company from external threats. Now, it became my most valuable tool. I began reviewing everything connected to my project. Emails, approval chains, transaction histories. Patterns started to emerge quickly. Victor had been authorizing financial movements that didn't appear in official reports. Adjustments were made later to balance records, but the original entries still existed in system logs. Marcus handled the financial side. He approved transfers, adjusted values, and ensured the visible records looked consistent. Together, they had built a system designed to hide irregular activity. I documented everything carefully: dates, timestamps, approvals, and links between actions. This wasn't guesswork. It was evidence. By the end of the week, I understood the full structure of what they were doing. And more importantly, I knew exactly how to expose it. Marcus began acting differently. Even though he tried to maintain normal behavior, he checked his phone more often, stepping away to take calls that he never explained. At the same time, he became more attentive. He asked about the wedding plans, brought small gifts, and made an effort to appear present. It felt controlled, almost rehearsed. I observed everything without reacting. At work, Victor increased his involvement in my project. He requested deeper access, more detailed updates, and more direct influence over decisions that had once been mine alone. I gave him what he needed, but only on the surface. The core systems remained under my control. At night, I focused on the next phase of my plan. I built a timed release system connected to my archive. If I was removed from my role, accused, or blocked from access, the entire dataset would be released automatically to the board, to regulators, and to a journalist known for uncovering corporate misconduct. I tested the system multiple times to ensure it worked without error. It did. For the first time since I discovered the truth, I felt stable, not safe, but prepared. The office environment began to shift in ways that were subtle but impossible to ignore. Access permissions were adjusted gradually. Files I relied on became restricted without explanation. Meetings I once led were reassigned to others. No one said anything directly, but the message was clear. They were preparing for something. I continued my work as usual, maintaining the same level of focus and consistency. One afternoon, as I walked past Victor's office, I overheard part of a conversation. His voice was low, but I recognized enough to understand the context. After next week, it's finalized. I didn't stop. I didn't react. I kept walking. That evening, Marcus suggested moving our wedding date forward. He explained it as a scheduling adjustment, something practical. I agreed immediately. I understood the timing. They wanted everything completed before their plan reached its final stage. That night, I reviewed my systems again. Every file was secured. Every trigger was active. There were no gaps. I was no longer uncertain about what was coming. I was waiting for it. And when it happened, I would be ready. The meeting came without warning. I was called into a conference room where senior management had already gathered. The atmosphere was controlled and tense, as if everyone understood the importance of what was about to happen. Victor sat at the head of the table. Marcus was there as well, along with other executives. Victor began speaking in a calm, measured tone. He explained that concerns had been raised about financial inconsistencies within my project. Then he said my name. I listened without interruption. They presented documents, reports showing discrepancies, adjustments that didn't align, and data that suggested errors connected to my work. It matched exactly what I had already seen. Marcus maintained a serious expression, as if he had no involvement. When Victor finished, I asked one question. "Is this your final conclusion?" He nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I stood, thanked them for the information, and left the room. By the end of the day, I was suspended. My access was revoked. My responsibilities were reassigned. To everyone else, it appeared that I had lost everything. But in reality, this was the moment everything began to change. Being suspended did not feel like defeat. It felt like confirmation. The clause I had inserted into the contract had been triggered exactly as planned. The moment they removed me under disputed circumstances, the system activated automatically. An independent audit had begun. They didn't know it yet, but the process was already beyond their control. I stayed home the next day. No calls, no emails, no attempts to defend myself publicly. Silence allowed everything to unfold without interference. Behind that silence, actions were already in motion. The audit firm received full access to the project records. The board received formal notification of irregular activity. The journalist received a secured package containing key evidence. Marcus became unsettled. He took more calls, paced more often, and struggled to maintain his usual composure. Victor remained quiet, which told me everything I needed to know. They were trying to understand what had happened, but they were too late. The process had already begun. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt steady. Not because it was over, but because the truth was already moving beyond their reach. 2 days after my suspension, the company changed in a way that was impossible to ignore. Messages began spreading across departments. Emergency meetings were scheduled without explanation. Senior leaders who rarely appeared in person were suddenly present in the office. Something serious was happening, even if most people didn't understand what it was yet. By midday, an official notice was released internally. An external audit had been initiated. No reason was given, but the tone of the message made it clear that this was not routine. That afternoon, I received a call from a member of the board. His voice was calm but direct. "Audrey, we need to meet." I agreed immediately. When I arrived at the office, the atmosphere was different from before. There was no tension directed at me, no assumptions. They wanted answers. I sat across from them, composed and focused. They explained that concerns had been raised about internal operations and that the audit had uncovered irregular patterns. They needed clarity, and I was ready to provide it. For the first time since everything began, I wasn't being questioned as a suspect. I was being asked as a source of truth, and that shift changed everything. I presented everything step by step, ensuring every detail was clear and supported. I began with the contract and explained how I had built the project from the ground up. I described how control was scheduled to transfer and how I discovered the message thread before signing. Then I showed them the evidence. The conversations between Marcus and Victor. Their plan to remove me after the transfer. Their strategy to shift responsibility onto me. Next, I moved to the financial records. Hidden transactions, adjusted reports, approval patterns that didn't follow standard processes. Each point connected directly to the next. The room remained silent as they reviewed the material. One board member leaned forward. "When did you first discover this?" "Before I signed the contract," I replied. There was a pause. "And you still signed it?" "Yes." "Why?" I met his gaze. "Because I needed them to act first." That answer changed the tone of the room completely. They understood. This wasn't an oversight. It wasn't confusion. It was deliberate. By the time I finished, there was no doubt left. The situation was clear, and the responsibility did not belong to me. The response from the board was immediate. Victor was removed from his position that same day. His system access was revoked, and he was escorted out of the building under supervision. Marcus was suspended shortly after. His accounts were frozen, and he was placed under formal investigation. The company issued a public statement. It was carefully worded, designed to maintain control over the situation while avoiding full disclosure. But the situation had already moved beyond internal control. The journalist I had contacted released the story within hours. It detailed the misuse of authority, the hidden financial activity, and the plan to remove me unfairly. My name appeared in the report not as a suspect, but as the person who uncovered the truth. Messages began arriving from colleagues. Some expressed support. Others asked questions. Many remained silent. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. The facts were already visible. The narrative had changed. And for the first time since everything began, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel before. Relief. Not because it was over, but because the truth was no longer hidden. Marcus tried to contact me that evening. His calls came repeatedly. Messages followed, each one asking for a chance to explain. "It's not what it looks like," he wrote. "Please let me talk to you." I read the message once and set my phone aside. There was nothing left to explain. Later that night, he came to my apartment. I opened the door but stayed in the doorway. He looked different. His confidence was gone, replaced by uncertainty. "Audrey, I made a mistake," he said. I remained calm. "This wasn't a mistake," I replied. "This was planned." He tried to continue, but I stopped him. I saw everything. There was silence. For the first time, he had no response. No explanation. No defense. I closed the door. There was no anger in that moment. No need for it. Some endings don't require confrontation. They require clarity, and this was one of them. Victor's situation became more serious as the audit progressed. The investigation uncovered additional transactions beyond what I had initially found. There were more accounts, more irregular approvals, and a pattern that extended further back than expected. Regulators became involved quickly. What started as an internal audit developed into a formal investigation. His name began appearing in public reports, no longer associated with leadership, but with misconduct. I followed the developments from a distance. There was no satisfaction in it, only understanding. Actions lead to outcomes. This was his. Inside the company, the impact was clear. Departments began reviewing their processes. Leaders questioned systems that had previously gone unchallenged. The structure that once allowed hidden activity to exist was being examined closely. There was tension, but there was also progress. The company was no longer operating on assumption. It was moving toward verification, and that change mattered. Because this time, things would not be allowed to remain hidden. A few days after the investigation became public, I received another call from the board. This time, the conversation was different. They were no longer asking questions. They were offering me control. They explained that the company needed restructuring at a level deeper than simple adjustments. Systems had failed, oversight had been weak, and trust had been broken. They wanted me to return not to my previous role, but to lead operational restructuring. I listened carefully before responding. Then I outlined my conditions. I wanted full authority over system design and process implementation. I wanted direct reporting access to the board. And I wanted complete transparency across all departments, with no hidden approvals or restricted oversight. There was no hesitation in their response. They agreed. That told me everything I needed to know. The situation was more serious than they were willing to say publicly. I accepted, but I understood one thing clearly. I was not returning to the same environment I had left. And I was not returning as the same person. This was not about restoring what had been broken. It was about building something stronger, something that could not be used against anyone the way it had been used against me. And this time, I would make sure it held. My return to the office was quiet but noticeable. No announcement was made, but people knew. The way conversations paused when I walked past, the way people looked at me carefully, respectfully made it clear. The story had spread. Even if the details were incomplete, the impact was understood. I didn't address it. I focused on my work. There was no time to adjust slowly. I began by reviewing access control systems across departments. The first issue was obvious. Too much power had been concentrated in too few hands. That would change immediately. I implemented layered access structures, ensuring that no single individual could authorize critical actions without independent verification. Then I strengthened audit trails. Every decision, every financial movement, every system change would be recorded and traceable. No gaps, no blind spots. I also introduced an independent reporting channel for employees, a secure system where concerns could be raised without fear of retaliation. That mattered to me, because I knew what it felt like to stand alone in a situation like that. This wasn't just operational restructuring. It was a shift in how the company functioned at its core. And slowly, stability began to return. Change rarely happens without resistance, and this was no exception. Some teams adjusted quickly, understanding the need for stronger controls. Others resisted quietly, uncomfortable with the loss of unchecked authority they had grown used to. I expected that. I didn't push aggressively. I stayed consistent. Clear expectations, transparent processes, fair enforcement, no exceptions. Over time, resistance began to fade. Results spoke louder than arguments. Errors decreased. Processes became more efficient. Decisions were documented clearly instead of being handled informally. People began to understand that the new structure wasn't about restriction, it was about clarity. I saw it in small ways. Managers asking for verification before approving decisions. Teams documenting steps they would have previously handled without oversight. Employees speaking up when something didn't align. Trust doesn't return immediately. It builds slowly, and for the first time since everything happened, I could see it forming again, not based on assumption, but on structure, and that made it stronger than before. As the company stabilized, I found myself reflecting on the choices I had made. There had been a moment when I could have reacted differently. I could have confronted Marcus the night I found the messages. I could have exposed everything immediately, but that would have changed the outcome. It would have given them time to adjust, time to hide their actions, time to shift responsibility again. Instead, I chose to wait, to observe, to understand the full structure before acting. That decision made all the difference. This wasn't about reacting quickly. It was about acting precisely, and precision requires patience. That lesson stayed with me, because situations like this are rarely about a single moment. They are about timing, preparation, and control. And when those align, the outcome becomes inevitable. Trust became something I understood in a completely different way. Before, I gave it easily. I believed that consistency and shared goals were enough to build it. Now, I understood that trust is built through patterns, through actions repeated over time, through transparency and accountability. I didn't become distant. I became aware. I paid attention to details I would have overlooked before. Consistency, behavior, decisions under pressure. That awareness changed how I moved through everything. In work, in relationships, in life, I didn't assume trust anymore. I observed it, and that made all the difference. Because understanding people clearly is not about what they say, it's about what they do. When they believe no one is watching, I stopped looking back. Not because I forgot what happened, but because there was nothing left there for me. Every question had been answered. Every hidden detail had been revealed. There was no confusion left, no uncertainty, no unfinished thoughts. For a long time, I believed closure came from conversations, from explanations, from hearing the other side. Now I understood something different. Closure comes from clarity. And I already had that. I knew exactly what they had done. I knew why they had done it, and I knew how it had ended. There was nothing left to revisit, so I focused forward, on what I could build, on what I could control, on the systems I was redesigning and the structure I was strengthening. Each decision I made now was intentional, not reactive, not emotional, but deliberate. And that shift changed everything. Because once you stop looking back, you stop carrying what no longer belongs to you. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely free to move forward without hesitation, without doubt, and without anything holding me in place. Work became something different after everything settled. It was no longer just about results or performance. It became about purpose. Every system I built now had meaning behind it. It wasn't just about efficiency, it was about protection. I focused on creating structures that ensured fairness across every level of the organization. No hidden approvals, no unchecked authority, no decisions made without accountability. The systems became stronger, but more importantly, they became clearer. People understood how things worked. They understood where responsibility sat. And they understood that actions could no longer be hidden behind complexity. That changed behavior, not through pressure, but through awareness. And that kind of change lasts longer because it doesn't rely on control. It relies on understanding. For the first time, I wasn't just solving problems, I was preventing them. And that gave my work a different kind of value, one that went beyond numbers or outcomes, one that shaped how the company would operate long after everything else had passed. I rebuilt my personal life the same way I rebuilt the systems at work, carefully and with intention. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't try to replace what had been lost. I took time to understand what I needed, what I valued, and what I would never ignore again. The experience had changed me, but not in a way that made me closed off. It made me aware. I paid attention to consistency, to actions that matched words, to patterns that revealed more than any promise ever could. I stopped expecting people to prove themselves quickly. Instead, I allowed time to show the truth. That shift made everything clearer. I didn't feel the need to control everything anymore. I only needed to understand it. And that understanding gave me something stronger than certainty. It gave me confidence, not in others, but in my ability to recognize what was real and what was not. And that changed how I moved forward in every part of my life. I became someone they never expected me to be. Not because I changed completely, but because I understood more than they assumed I ever would. They thought I would react emotionally. They thought I would confront them without preparation. They thought I would fall into the position they had created for me. They were wrong. I didn't react. I observed. I prepared. And when the time came, I acted with precision. That was the difference. Not strength, not luck, but control. The ability to see clearly and move at the right moment. That's what changed everything. And once you understand that, you move differently. You see situations differently. You understand people differently. And you stop underestimating your own ability to navigate complexity. Because the truth is, most people reveal more than they realize. You just have to be paying attention when they do. They thought they had ended my story. They believed I would lose everything, my career, my reputation, my future. They believed I would disappear quietly, leaving them to move forward without consequence. But they were wrong. They didn't end anything. They revealed everything. And in doing that, they gave me something they never intended to give: clarity, control, and complete ownership of my future. I didn't need revenge. The truth was enough. It exposed them. It corrected the narrative. And it placed everything back where it belonged. I moved forward without hesitation. Not because nothing had happened, but because everything had been resolved, and that resolution gave me something stronger than closure. It gave me direction. A future built on awareness, not assumption. A path defined by decisions, not circumstances. And a sense of control that no one could take from me again. Because once you understand how things truly work, you stop being part of someone else's plan, and you start creating your own.